Hi, welcome to this third video about SpringBoot generated by JHipster. If you did not watch the two first one, I would suggest you do it first. In this third video, we'll take a look at the configuration class that were generated to configure SpringBoot, and that will complete our series of 3 videos. So now we go under a more complex part, the Java configuration. Anything that we use, if we try to do something with Spring Boot, you go on tutorials, you will find out that you need to do a lot of configuration. With JHipster, they are all done for you. So if you don't use JHipster, use it as a guideline, as a template to learn how things work. There's really good stuff here. So the web security configuration, this one configure the inbound queues. So basically configures the topic that will be available on the system. If there's no destination, you need still to be logged in. If you match topic tracker, you need to be admin because the tracker will be the resulting updates. If you have any topic, you need to be authenticated, and you are limited to message and subscriber. And for any other message, it's deny all. The WebSocket configuration is the one that start the message broker. So you have a WebSocket message broker that will receive the message and send it back to any WebSocket waiting for them. And you have this IP address here that we talked earlier. We'll look at it. So basically we configure the WebSocket, the JHipster properties here still, because there's a lot of configuration that part of the JHipster configs, and we register the endpoint. So the WebSocket tracker will be an endpoint available. We have some cores here, so we have some allowed origin, so we'll be able to test them using npm on different port than the service we use. It takes care of that, and there's two more things, default handshake and session handshake interceptor. Those two ones do two different things. The first one is to grab the address of the remote connection to know who is calling you. If you're using remote address and you're behind a firewall or proxy, just make sure that the header for the proxy are transferred. Otherwise, you will get the remote address from the colleague one, which will be inside your network. So you need to transfer the x404, which is standard header for the remote host. We also have the default handshake handler, and this one is for creating anonymous authority in case there is no user. So that way we can still send action from anonymous users. The web configurer initializes servlet context and mainly does a couple of things. It uses the MIME set, it switched the media type, which usually use char set UTF-8, but in capital letters. It just turned it down into lowercase letter, both for HTML and JSON. Apparently JSON was causing problem with Cloud Foundry, and Internet Explorer causing problem with the HTML. And that also takes care of the location for static address. And it's where we look at the target. So we try to find out the target folder to know if we're in a local environment, and we added the class and the static component. So when we run the Maven wrapper, it adds this path as a target. It also takes care of the coarse filter for the API management and API docs. So anything that we call, any API that we call using the UI, and since the UI can run in npm on a different port, then we just disable the cores as they're listed in the configuration. Good, that's pretty much that for the web configurer. This configuration here only applies to production. In production, we have resource location and resource path, which comes from the class path. So we search in the class path. It will be either a jar or a folder depending on how you bundle the application. But basically we'll search for static content and register that as our resource. So the way we configure the static resource is a little bit different when we develop or when we run in Docker. So that's why it's important to build them and run them in Docker from time to time. We also have the Synchrotic Configuration. So it enables web security, it enables global method security, which will allow us to write the post enable some pre-authentication that we've seen for the call on the first REST controller, where we were limited to the admin role. That allows us to do that. And we also take care of the problem at the same time. So we configure the security. Anything that is under app content swagger test, we just inure the security on them. We just let them go through. And here's the more complex one. We start with the HTTP security. We take care of the cross-site, take care of the couple of filter, the exception handling for the problem support. We take care of referrer, a lot of security here, a lot of policy that we require, and we check here that all those are authorized, and management and WebSocket tracker are authorized only by admin. How to log in, because we're using OAuth 2, and of course the configuration for the GW2E and OAuth 2 client, which is done. So that's pretty much a lot of stuff that you would have to do, but it's already done. OpenAPI configuration, it's only if you have the profile Swagger, and basically what it does is that it creates docket for your Swagger UI. It exposes your Swagger API and also some REST endpoint. So you have both the UI, Swagger UI, but you also have the API endpoint of Swagger that lists the APIs and gives more information about what they can do, but from REST API point of view. The login configuration, add the JSON console appender, because you want to use the JSON console appender if you're using Logstash. When we send log to Logstash, if we only send log in a plain format, we'll have to configure Logstash to parse those log and store them, while if you send them in JSON, they will be split by their key directly by Logstash, making them really easier to find if you're using something like ELK, Elasticsearch Logstash Keymanna. Will be really easier. Otherwise, couple of context listener on the logging. Logging aspect, basically activate logging aspect. Logging aspect is here AOP, access-oriented programming, and what we do in logging aspect. Logging aspect will create a proxy and just trap anything going toward your class and log them. So basically it creates a point cut. So that's where we'll create a fake proxy for anything within Spring Framework repository service controller, but also in our class and repository service and REST. So it will create point cut at the specific point. And if you are in one of these point cut, after throwing an exception, it will log more information. And if you're under those two point cut, it will log around, meaning that it will log what argument you send. It will log what result you get after proceeding. It will just proceed with the point cut, and after it will log out the result. If there's an exception in the way, it will log the error, throw it back in that case. So that's the login aspect that gets activated using the login aspect configuration. You have the local configuration. It's using what's called Angular Cookie Local Resolver. It's made by JHipster. Even if it's written in Angular, it works also for any web app. Basically, you create the resolver, you specify a cookie, and when the system uses a resolver to find the local, it will first try to look at the cookie, then it will revert back to default, and when you change the local, it will update the cookie as soon as possible. The Jackson configuration. Jackson is used to transfer JSON to Java object. By configuring Jackson, you specify the way to work with some time module in Java 8 and some Java time module for other Java system, and also for problem and for constraint violation. So if you're trying to serialize or deserialize an object in JSON and there's problem, it will turn back to problem module to raise up the error. We have this datetime format configuration which register a formatter registry. A formatter registry is a class that allows to transfer from one type of data to the other one, and Spring will try to use them as the base for making most conversions. So in that case, we say that we're using ISO format, pretty standard, and that applies to most date in the system. except for database, because database need converter to date to zone date time and zone date time to date in their instance. That's a database configuration for anything except Spring Cloud. Spring Cloud will probably inject more information about the repository, so it will be a little bit different on the factory. So basically what we have a configuration, we enable Mongo repository for our package. So everything under repository will be used for Mongo. We have a profile that is not Spring Cloud. We start the Mongo auto configuration, which will try to create anything Mongo needs, driver, and so on. And we enable Mongo editing, and that's the part where we can use the auditor aware reference, and we can use it for adding audits in our Mongo data. We have here custom conversion, I already talked about, dates and date. And we have MongoDB. MongoDB will take care of creating data. We'll look at the database migration package for that. But basically MongoDB scan package for migration, activate them, run them if they have not run yet, and just end up after. A couple of constant, nothing big. Cloud data configuration, this one run only in Spring Cloud. It's pretty the same as the Mongo, but it works differently. It uses here cloud to find out the service info on the MongoDB factory. It's main different. It really tried to find the MongoDB factory from cloud class, so it's a little bit different. We have some cache configuration. The cache configuration will make sure that when we create the AH cache, we put some timeout, and it also enable caching by default. That little annotation here enable the cache, which will fall back on a standard Java map, which doesn't expire. But if we have EH cache in the dependencies, it will use EH cache first. We have a key generator. The key generator is a prefix key generator from JHipster. What it does is that it takes the build properties and the git properties and prefix any key generated with that. Which means that when we put something in cache, it's always dependent on the git version and on the build version. So if your microservice is at some version and you upgrade the version, but your cache is stored locally on disk, when you update your SpringBoot, it's no more the same version, so the cache will just be inured. Otherwise, if your object type change, you will have trouble getting the object from the cache. It will not be able to deserialize them. If you have a field that doesn't exist anymore, you won't be able to deserialize the item in cache and get it back into a Java class. It will create problem. It will create problem also if you're using a distributed cache with different service. So while you update the service, you have the first microservice, it stored the item in Redis and try to retrieve it. You have the second microservice that start, but it's no more the same item. There's a difference, in which case having different key will make sure that only the same service on the same version will use the same cache IDs. So that allows for rolling deployment. The async configuration, it's enabling async calls, and it's also enabling scheduling. So that's what allows us to use the schedule at 12 a.m. to do some cleanup. And that creates a number of thread, number of queue, max size. So basic configuration that comes from the task execution properties, which are included in the application YAML. We have almost finally our application, which is prefixed by application. So if you have field name application.name in the application YAML and you have a field name, then the value will be transferred automatically to your application property. So it's here where you put your own configuration. You have DB migration initial setup, which is MongoDB. So it add authorities here with the initiator, so we can add admin user. This one basically create the authorities that we saw in the database first. The audit event converter simply convert the persistent audit event into an audit event both ways. Only special part here is that we had the remote address and the session ID. Address is standard. So that covers pretty much what we have to do with Java. There's still Docker and Gibs, but we'll take care of Docker into a second video. Thank you for watching this third video on Spring Boot generated by JHipster. If you find the video useful, don't forget to like the video. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel to receive updates and new video, including JHipster but other subjects too. Happy coding!